Alrighty, well, we'll jump in here. So I'm Holly Coy. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Policy and Communications. Superintendent Balo is down the hall working on other bills, so I apologize that she couldn't be here, but hopefully we will serve her well in your stead. Jenna Conway has joined us to talk about the early childhood pieces, and of course we've got Kent on hand for technical questions and assistance. So we have prepared some information for you on three main topics. The first being the governor's introduced, the governor's K-12 budget amendments that were dropped on Friday. And then we'll talk about the DOE agency budget as introduced by then Governor Northam. And then Jenna's going to give you an update on kind of the lay of the land related to early childhood, as well as the related introduced budget on early childhood. So starting off with Governor Youngkin's K-12 budget amendments, there are two related that are funding, and then one that's language only. So the two that are monetary in nature include the lab schools and the SRO incentive grants. These are both programs that or grant funds that are established in code already. The lab schools are under the Department of Education, and then the SRO incentive grants are actually housed at DCJS. Their board establishes the criteria in consultation with us for those SRO incentive grants. And for the lab schools, the Code of Virginia charges the Board of Ed with establishing criteria on how those funds are dispersed. There is legislation. Yeah, no. Yes, Senator. So this.
Can you switch to the chair back a little bit so I can see? Is that on this page, on page 8, 5?
Yep.
You got it there.
Yep.
Okay, I hadn't flipped yet. Okay, go ahead.
So that is the language in its entirety. The budget language mirrors the language in Senate Bill 570 and House Bill 1068, which are governor's bills with the exact same language.
Give me an example of an inherently divisive concept.
Mr. Chairman, I think the idea here, as you'll see in the language, is to address some issues, particularly conversations around race that have been of concern to the governor.
All right, let me ask you this. If I'm teaching U.S. history, and we get up around the Civil at some point, is it okay to say we had slavery in this country from 1619 to 1865? Is it okay to say that? Is it okay to say that the whites were the slave owners and the blacks or African Americans were the slaves? You don't consider that's not divisive?
Under the language proposed here, no, this does not address history content.
What? Give me an example of what you shouldn't say.
Based on the language here, you'll see examples about concepts relating to, individuals of one race, skin color, ethnicity, sex, or faith that is inherently superior.
Slow down. Say that again.
So a concept with an individual of one particular race, skin color, ethnicity, sex, or faith being inherently superior to another race, skin color, ethnicity, sex, or faith. So this particular...
Because I've talked to the school board members.
I got a good example for you.
Sure.
Massive resistance. Schools were closed down. When I was...
Are they able to talk about that?
Are they able to talk about that? That my schools were closed down when I was in first grade.
My understanding...
And why? And because the reason why they were closed down was because there was a resistance to integrating the schools. We're not able to say that. And I want specifically to have the governor answer that one because I was one of the victims of it. Senator Sasslaw?
Yeah.
So am I not able, so what if I say the reason why my schools were closed down is because there was a resistance to integrate the school, and so my schools were closed down for 5 years? That's a fact. Is that divisive?
Under this definition, I don't think so.
I can't hear
You said you
you.
don't think so.
I
but you
said
don't
under
know-
this definition.
But you don't know for sure, Holly.
I do not know for sure. This says that the definition is includes but is not limited to, but does not expand upon it further.
I want all students to know that my schools were closed down for 5 years when I was in
I
elementary
find it
school
hard to believe
because of massive
that
resistance. I
you'd be
think
barred
everybody
from
ought to know
stating
that.
what is a fact. They
That's a
were
fact.
closed by law, passed by the General Assembly of
To
Virginia,
keep me from getting an
Okay.
education.
Correct.
by the guy whose statute we just took down, Harry Byrd. Okay? I find it real hard to believe that you couldn't state what was a fact. Okay?
Correct.
I mean, what we may want to do is take a look at what language
I need to see that.
he's
Because
submitted.
that is a fact. It is a
'Cause-
fact. You know it's a fact.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I don't think anybody would argue that. But we need to see the exact language. Is this the exact language?
This is the exact language that is in the budget amendment, as well as the language that is in the bill.
Well,
They are the
You and
same.
Mamie might go over it.
I think we will because
See-
I
see
don't
what
think,
you
I
want.
think to this day, there's still not a recognition of the damage that was done to students who were the victims of
She was
massive
out of school for
resistance.
4 years. 4 years.
And so you're constantly in a mode of wondering, am I going to catch up? Is my education inferior to the other members? I mean, I ask you questions like that even now.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you all take a look and see what you want in the budget language.
Yeah, 'cause
Okay.
I don't like this at all. I'll tell you that right now,
Understood.
because I think everybody ought to know exactly what happened.
Understood. The next chunk of slides here relates to the DOE's agency budget as introduced by Governor Northam in December. Thank you for helping me catch up,
I think you
Jenna.
could make my tweet this afternoon. You told me you
Okay.
didn't think so.
What?
That-
Technical,
Go ahead,
okay.
Go ahead, I'm done. Keep moving.
Okay, I'm sorry if
No, I'm sorry.
perhaps I misstated.
No, I'm just saying that you got to carry out the mission of the administration.
Ma'am,
It's just that it's flawed. Okay?
I understand.
All right.
The first slide that we'll see here is an overview. Here, I'll click down there. There we go. Just a historical overview so you can see kind of general, non-general fund dollars going to the agency over the last few years, then the base for 2023, and then introduce changes for 23 and 24. You'll also see the authorized positions as well. You'll note that there is a significant jump in positions, and we'll get to that. That's in response to JLARC report last year about, in particular, the Office of School Quality and responding to those JLARC recommendations that were made. But we'll get there momentarily. First, I'll start with programmatic savings captured. So these are one-time funds that were removed from the base, essentially, given the one-time nature. So you'll see a few small training modules. Work is underway, and the funding is being utilized for those programs. You'll see the $68 million there related to COVID relief funding, and this removes essentially three different items related to COVID relief. CCDF, COVID dollars, so the subsidy dollars that were invested given the passage of House Bill 2206 from last year, expanding subsidy for child care for families in the wake of the pandemic. Through your growth assessments, we used federal pandemic dollars for those, and you'll see that shift over to growth assessments to the general fund later on, and then some funding for Virtual Virginia that we were using the pandemic dollars for. So as I mentioned, with regard to new items, there's a big emphasis in the response to JLARC. So in December of last year, JLARC issued a report on the operations of the agency. They made recommendations on a number of things. One of the items that they were very focused on was the Office of School Quality, and really calling on the department to rethink our strategy for supporting our divisions in greatest need of support as they strive to bring their students and support their students academically. So this is where the bulk of the positions are. So you'll see that in the first year, there's a request for 25 positions, and in the second year, that goes up to 50. The reason for this has to do with our current model, which when we are compared to other states, our ratio of staff to schools that we are serving is very high, and this slide is straight from the JLARC report. So by their analysis, we are about 1 staff for every 22 schools, whereas North Carolina was 1 staff for 8 schools. Kentucky is more of a 1-to-1 model. And so JLARC called on the department to develop a strategic plan for our Office of School Quality and to determine what investments were needed over the summer. And so we went through that, looked at the research around effective interventions from states in supporting our local divisions, got feedback, as did JLARC, from the field and our internal staff, which had revealed that the work the agency was doing was largely just compliance focused and was not the type of kind of on-the-ground mentoring and coaching, tying the data of a school's needs to the types of interventions and supports that were being provided. And so with all of that in mind, kind of coupled with the increased number of schools and divisions in need of support coming out of the pandemic as schools strive to support their students and their academic needs, we see at the same time this increasing need and demand for services. We, in light of that, have been working proactively with 12 school divisions around the state who our Office of School Quality identified for services and supports based on their academic outcomes, again, in the wake of the pandemic. So, good afternoon.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you, sir?
Well, you've been down here with the brain trust, so they decided they needed to bring the kindergarten down.
So on this next slide, you'll see a proposed organizational structure that really relies on these regional support teams. So the idea being that within the Office of School Quality, there is a creation of regional support teams. These are our superintendent regions around the state. There are 8 of those, but there is a proposed structure here with 5 teams around the state. And you'll see a dotted line there to a school quality committee. The concept here is that this is an internal entity that pulls expertise across instruction, assessment, special education, early childhood to come together and support those regional teams and offer research and assistance to the teams working on the ground and providing that kind of internal coordination and collaboration. The goal and the desired outcomes for those teams is that there would be increased use of data to inform decision-making, willing partnership, this kind of continuous improvement effort, and that the support that the state is providing would be data-driven, evidence-based, and of the highest quality, this coaching and mentoring that the research bears out to be effective. When working with those divisions who are either federally identified schools with level 2 and level 3 indicators, along with those divisions that are in a memorandum of understanding with the Board of Education, kind of given persistent issues with the success of their students. In addition to that focus on the Office of School Quality, there are a couple of other requests related to the agencies that are new. The first here is the continued support for the growth assessments. Those were passed by the General Assembly last year and are being phased in. This is where we are assessing students not just with SOLs at the end of the year, but with shortened yet reliable assessments at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year in grades 3 through 8 math and literacy. These are being funded with federal pandemic relief dollars, but then in FY24 you see the switch over to state funding for those. In addition, there is an item related to marijuana education, and this appropriation would support the development of a training module, ongoing hosting for that training module supporting school division staff, particularly at the middle and high school level, around the appropriate understanding of marijuana, given the legislation that emerged last year. It was a contingent there. And then just a couple other central office items. The statewide continued support for the statewide learning management system. So again, federally funded with the pandemic relief dollars in the interim in FY24, switching over and including one position to provide state support for that. The statewide learning management system, in short, is a platform that hosts virtual content. It is a platform that any school division in the Commonwealth has access to. They can use it for their teachers. If they don't have a platform that their division has procured on their own, their teachers can log on. They can post, all of the coursework for their course and use it as a Blackboard, for example, with their students. It can host asynchronous content, synchronous content, and obviously we've seen great demand for that in the wake of the pandemic.
Norma, there's a question.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
On the statewide learning management system, 5.1 million federal funds in FY23, what happens after that?
I believe that's the expiration of the federal funds,
I understand that.
thus the request for state support.
Therein lies the problem, isn't it?
I would ask in a different way, is that going to be an ongoing expense?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The next line item there is related but distinct. So this increases the non-general fund appropriation that supports Virtual Virginia. Virtual Virginia is a program of the departments that provides virtual learning opportunities for students, again, in any division in the Commonwealth. It has, again, seen great increased demand in the wake of the pandemic. It offers both full-time, part-time, summer, supplementary courses for students, K-12, though in its inception had been primarily focused on high school level courses, but is now much broader than that. The other items on this list include the Working Conditions and Climate Survey. A great question, sir. So this is a combined report. Two things have happened in the last few years. One, beginning back in 2018, the General Assembly asked the department to administer every other year a voluntary anonymous survey of school personnel about working conditions in their schools. At the time, no money was appropriated to go with that request. We had some federal grant funding that could support the administration of it. That federal grant funding is running out. Additionally, a climate survey that DCJS conducts, this is an annual survey, students and staff, the students are grades 6 through 12, is conducted. And again, at the request of the General Assembly, we've been trying to consolidate surveys. And so for the first time in 2021, DOE and DCJS administered kind of a cohesive working conditions and climate survey of staff and students. As I mentioned, this has been supported with some federal grant funds, some part-time positions that have been cobbled together with that funding. But the agency is requesting 2 positions to support that ongoing work to facilitate the required surveys.
Senator Norman.
Looking comprehensively at the overall budget in your arena, have you attempted to quantify the number of programs that have been relying upon federal dollars that are now going to become permanently embedded in our budget and that we are going to have to finance?
I don't know that a comprehensive review of that nature has been done. I think the most obvious bucket would be that related to pandemic relief dollars. That is the most immediate in front of us with that
That's what he's talking
timeline.
about.
Right. This one is not being funded with pandemic relief dollars.
That's correct.
Right. This is a request of the General Assembly.
And I thought you indicated that on the working conditions and climate survey that some of that was being paid for federal dollars.
It is, but it is not pandemic related federal dollars.
I think it was want to know how much we are going to have to fund in reoccurring ongoing expenses as a result of the expiration of federal dollars.
We can work on pulling that for you, sir.
No, but especially since we're gonna be taking all these tax cuts.
Well, I don't know
Okay.
about that.
Well,
No?
well, we are, but we need to have a global picture, I think.
Yes, but you're correct.
And to me, this doesn't involve you all.
No, you're correct.
To me, as we start to assess and debate some of these tax cuts, we need to know what we're committed to in these other
No, I
sectariats.
understand.
That's right, exactly, exactly.
And
Well, they're only concerned with one.
I got it, but there are people in the
Sure.
revenue administration that is finding their way.
I'll say.
And there are institutional memories within this group and the rest of the Senate Finance Committee that have some agility at it right now, and I think we need to know what we're looking at.
Sure. Holly is aware also.
By the way, apparently he's backed off that cents per gallon. If you remember, if you remember on my bill.
He
I
thinks he's
said
whispering, but we can all hear it.
CPG, yeah, every year.
Well, he knows some
So,
of their R's are not supportive of it.
Huh?
He knows some of their R's are
Yeah,
not supportive.
No problem.
all right.
The last two items here, the first is a one-time study fund to look at establishing a STEM governor school on the Eastern Shore. And then the last one is a position.
Let me ask you this, you're talking about a Thomas Jefferson type thing?
Yeah, a governor school program of that nature.
Yeah, one of the problems that you have there, and I mean, I'm not saying, we shouldn't definitely look at doing it, is the enrollment there is, you got to remember, Jefferson's drawing, if you look at the population of Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun, they're drawing from over 2 million people. And on the Eastern Shore, you barely got, what do you got, 50 to 100,000, something like that. So, I mean, it's, there ought to be some way to get them to Norfolk, to build it there that would,
Right.
Draw from Norfolk, Portsmouth, Chesapeake.
From the 757.
And then do one on the, north of the James on that I-64 corridor. In other words, there'd be one there that, maybe 30, 40 miles up that would capture everybody essentially east of Henrico,
That's right.
all the way to Hampton. And one of the things to keep in mind, the kids that are going to the Science High School in Northern Virginia, from some of the parts of Loudoun County, they're commuting an hour and a half on. See, what happens is they go to their school, so there's a school bus that takes them to their school, and then another bus there takes them to the Science High School, and you total it all up, and it's an hour and a half each way. So,
If you're on the Eastern Shore, then you also got to go through that tunnel.
well, they would. I mean, it's not an easy
No.
problem to deal with. I understand that.
No.
We need to build more of these schools around the state. But I'm not sure the Eastern Shore,
Is the right
is the
place.
right
I know a
place.
little bit about the Eastern Shore, having represented it
Right.
for some period of time. And I know what the governor was doing here, and let's not go buy him favors on the Eastern Shore. They disdain him. But, and there's an awful lot of poverty over there. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that in a disingenuous way whatsoever. You've got that pocket up around Chincoteague where Wallops Island and, a lot of the space launches are there. You've got some very well-educated individuals that are there who obviously want the best education they can get for their children. And I would not say, I don't represent them anymore, so I can say it, but I'm not sure that the Accomack and Northampton school system is the strongest in the state. And if you look for performance levels, it is not that strong on it. And, you talk about building in Norfolk. Well, one of the problems is that the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel system
That's exactly what I was referring to.
has not been particularly gracious in foregoing tolls.
That's right.
There was a time where Norfolk General, there was no oncology facilities on the Eastern Shore. So if if you had cancer, you had to go to Norfolk. And I tried to get the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel Authority to give free passage through the tunnel system. At that point, it's $15 away. Norfolk General was providing free cancer treatment for these indigent patients on the eastern shore, and the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel wanted $15 every way. And so they have not been particularly gracious on it, and
Yeah.
I worry about that being a.
No, I understand, yeah.
That's some of but I say, you say the corporate memory that's missing, that this administration didn't tap into by talking to members of the legislature.
Excuse me. I'll be
Sorry.
quiet for a while.
It's okay.
That's not a promise.
We won't hold you to it. The last item there is a position at the department to support social emotional learning standards. These are the standards that the General Assembly asked the department to establish. Those are optional for school divisions should they choose to use them. And this would provide additional support to divisions on how to appropriately deploy those standards and or resources with them. I think that brings me to the end of my portion, and I'll turn it over to Jenna, but happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
We're good. Excellent. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Jenna Conway, our Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education. Thank you for having us this afternoon. I wanted to share some key data insights. So we now have formally moved early childhood from various state agencies to the Department of Education to give you that landscape, and then to talk about the proposed the investments rather in the proposed budget. The key takeaways as we relate to our Birth to 5 system, which is fundamentally a public-private system, is everybody is back and operating in person. All of our pre-K in schools, all of our Head Start programs, and more than 90% of our child care programs that were open as of March of 2020 have reopened. This is optional. None of early childhood is compulsory, so we were concerned. I shared data with you about some of the historic under-enrollment last year, and we've rebounded to or above pre-pandemic levels in terms of participation. And more, our families are relying on this mix of publicly funded private programs. So whether that's our voucher program, child care subsidy, or mixed delivery, our families are needing full day, full year, or flexibility, and it's a really important, and it's a growing slice of the early childhood system. That's the positive. The challenge is, and I believe, Senator, you spoke about it last time we heard from you, is that we have had significant setbacks, and we see it in some of our kindergarten readiness results, particularly in early literacy and math. So there were consequences to losing tons of kids in preschool last year, and noting that most of our child care educators make much lower wages than our K-12 educators. The staffing, there's a workforce crisis right now in terms of being able to attract and retain staff. This gives you a sense across our programs of both the drop and how we've come back. But the two I want to highlight here is, again, the child care subsidy program, our voucher program across the state, where parents can choose a program that makes most sense, whether in a family day home, a faith-based preschool, or child care center, has rebounded. And we are very excited to see that it's up to 28,000 children. And our mixed delivery program, which offers an equivalent of the Virginia Preschool Initiative in private settings. We've seen historic growth, which is really important. Many of our school-based programs were not offering in person for the entirety of last year, and mixed delivery was. We still know that our potential demand exceeds slots. And just as a reminder, early childhood is a little bit different from K-12. There's not a guarantee for every child. None of it's compulsory. But when you look at potential need, so if the farthest bar over is all of the children birth to 5 in the Commonwealth, the second bar is those who would be below 300% of the federal poverty level and likely eligible for some version of services. And you'll see that's about 300,000 children. Of that, only 74,000 children are currently served. So there's a significant delta between the potential need, families who would otherwise find childcare, which is over $12,000 for a 3 or 4-year-old, and could be up to twice that for an infant toddler. We only are serving about 12% of those potentially eligible children. Of those, the vast majority of these slots support preschool. So when you think about the mix of the funding sources, early Head Start, Child Care Subsidy, Virginia Preschool Initiative, mixed delivery, roughly 70% of those slots support preschool. The other ones are infants and toddler, and then, again, because you can't leave a 6-year-old alone after school, before and after school care. Still, even though 70% of those dollars go to preschool, there's still a pretty significant need for preschool. And so the black bar shows you how many children are currently served by our publicly funded programs, and the red bar, oh, I moved the slides around, sorry, if you'll fast forward one more, Senator, shows you how many, there's nearly 66,000 3 and 4-year-olds who are not currently served. So that gives you a sense on our need to continue to develop more choices for more families, again, in our public-private system. As I noted before, the other key theme in early childhood right now is some of the concerning data coming forward. Virginia, thanks to the leadership of this body, has the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program, and this shows the impact or how sort of our youngest learners are doing. As you see this year for our incoming kindergartners in 2021, 42% of them are coming in not ready in at least one of these areas: literacy, math, self-regulation, and social skills. The real concerns are in literacy and math. Another way of putting this is it means more than 21,000 kindergartners are at serious risk of reading failure if there's not further intervention, which is our unprecedented numbers. We saw some of this last year, and it just the problem continues to grow. We know it's particularly pronounced in some of our historically underserved populations. So if you compare it to sort of 42% of children overall not ready, that jumps up to 52% of our Black students, 60% of our Hispanic students, more than half of our students from low-income backgrounds, and 2/3 of our English language learners or multilingual learners, as well as our children who identify with special needs. Bright spot here in this overall concerning data, and I know there's conversations both in early childhood and K-3 about literacy, is that the children who do have the opportunity to participate, whether that's Virginia Preschool Initiative or equivalent in our private settings mixed delivery, are much more likely to come in, particularly those who come from low-income or disadvantaged backgrounds. Just want to highlight here again our early childhood educators, many of whom work in these private settings, on average receive between $10 and $12 an hour. And with all you see right now in the media, there continues to be enormous staffing challenges. What we hear from child care providers across the Commonwealth is that they are turning away children, families who want to go to work or pursue schools for greater self-sufficiency for their family cannot find child care, right? And that's having kind of an effect on the workforce of today as well as the workforce of tomorrow, and this continues to be one of the largest challenges we face. Senator, you have a question?
I happen to know one very well who is a kindergarten teacher, kindergarten 3, 4, and one of the things that she has noticed after the pandemic situation where there was a lot of virtual learning that was going on, that particularly the lower income minorities, and you all like to use other euphemisms for them, but primarily the Black children that are coming from lower income communities that might have 2 working parents and they left alone all day. That's not a criticism, that's just a reality. They might not have internet, and so therefore the accessibility of remote learning has not been there, and that this year has been hell because you've got the disparity between some of the more affluent, and I use that term very loosely, who come from families with more income that have had access to the internet, who maybe only one parent is working but the other one is at home, and the disparity is incredible. And unfortunately, trying to bifurcate your instructional approach where you've got this disparity is very challenging, and she feels that she's got to place a greater emphasis onto those ones who are underperforming to try to bring them up as much as they can, but of course, that has a issue as well. What do you do about that?
Absolutely. Well, first, I mean, I think we see that borne out in the data, and we are hearing that. I think whether it's access to programming, whether it's all of the children that went missing last year, or whether the fact that it's virtual pre-K looks very different from virtual ninth grade, like it's nearly impossible. And we've had to make special adjustments even in our guidelines on virtual. Getting 4-year-olds to sit still and pay attention to a screen when they are intended to learn through play and interaction, and that's how they develop some of those skills that enable them to be effective in a kindergarten classroom. A lot of that didn't occur last year. You know, I think part of what we sort of recognize is we've got to then double down on our investment going forward on early childhood to sort of, you know, to stem the tide of that. And then I think we've got to look very seriously. And if you look at, I know there's separate conversations happening about work on our kindergarten, first and second grade, catching children up, looking at how we individualize and support education. You know, we have to address both the social emotional needs as well as the fact that these literacy and math numbers are incredibly concerning. I would note as well, one of the advantages of doing this work in Virginia, really since the 2017 JLARC study, is that you all called for us coming up with a way of sort of measuring and thinking about the quality of Virginia Preschool Initiative. And we've been putting that in place kind of across all of our publicly funded classrooms, even throughout the pandemic. And that remains really, really important, right? Making sure that kids have access to experiences that move them as far as possible within that year. And I think that becomes part of what we've got to do for kindergarten, first grade, is to make sure that we are individualizing the instruction. It's incredibly challenging for educators because I think your way of describing it as bifurcating is exactly what we're hearing in kindergarten and first grade and 4-year-olds. You have some coming in who haven't been in a sort of organized setting for 2 years, right next to somebody who's been doing, you know, Khan Academy every day and reading with mom or dad or grandma. So it's an incredible need for individualization. The other piece to note here is that one of the good things about the move in Virginia to put us all in one house is that we're able to think about the center enrollment from early childhood all the way through early elementary and looking at, in this area, how we make some of those adjustments. The proposed investments in the budget basically are in 4 areas. So completing the unification of the early childhood system, making sure there's more choices for more families through our child care subsidy program, Virginia Preschool Initiative and Mixed Delivery, supporting a data-driven recovery from COVID, much of what you just asked about, Senator, and then laying the groundwork for thoughtful future expansion of our public-private system. So, and again, very important we do that thoughtfully. Item 129 is really kind of, again, going back to that 2017 JLARC study and the require.
Fund that with marijuana. Lay the groundwork for future expansion of public.
Yes, so in the future, the 40% of the marijuana revenues are set to go to support the expansion of preschool. And thinking about how we do that, and we do it in a way that represents the right public-private mix.
I will ask you whether they think that's a good policy. You don't have to answer.
So we coming back to item 129, this is the focus on accountability. And as we're building out our statewide uniform measurement and improvement system, really dating back to the findings and recommendations of the 2017 JLARC study, this would provide 2 positions at the DOE to support state pre-kindergarten, both Virginia Preschool Initiative and Mixed Delivery. We would continue to expand the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program as we evaluate 4-year-olds across our publicly funded programs, as well as 3-year-olds, and to continue to make a state investment to evaluate our state-funded classrooms. So we use a mix of state and federal funding. The Child Care and Development Block Grant covers the child care classrooms. The state funds are just needed for those Virginia Preschool Initiative classrooms that are state funded.
Would all of this be new money?
No, these are the totals. So you'll notice the incremental increase. So it's about $1 million in Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program, about $500K in the first year, in the observations, and then another additional 200 in the next year. So it's an incremental growth over time. There's also language in 129. This is, again, at the work group stage, convening a work group to look at how to use the marijuana tax revenues to maximize access to public and private pre-kindergarten. They're creating kind of and calling on us to develop a methodology that looks at the actual cost of care, something similar to the K-12 benchmarking, and then calls for a set of changes to our child care subsidy program. So this is a federally funded program through the Child Care and Development Block Grant, and making a set of changes to make that work better for working families in the Commonwealth. Removing a 72-month limit, an sort of artificial limit that Virginia has set, as well as encouraging parents to pursue work, paying based on enrollment, setting rates based on cost benchmarks, and eliminating some of the co-payments that our parents face, basically trying to align our private options with our public options. Again, these are for publicly funded programs that are limited eligibility. Item 136 is some of our direct investments in our classrooms, our educators. So we've got a slight expansion in our Wolf Trap program that's focused on STEM and early literacy. One example of a program that we know is working and growing that to serve more kids. We've also expanding our mixed delivery program. So if you look at this, is about a $2 million increase from FY23, and then an additional just over $3 million investment in the following year. This is able to offer more choices. Again, this is public preschool, but in our private childcare settings, full day, full year, to meet the needs of working families, as well as an infant toddler pilot. This is something that's working, and so trying to thoughtfully grow this program, but not growing too fast, making sure that it's a worthwhile taxpayer investment. Our early childhood educator incentive program, something that had $5 million last year in the state budget, based on evidence that it works, and is helping and supporting our child care programs to attract and keep teachers, doubling that investment while continuing to measure and monitor the impact there. And then exploring a grow your own early childhood educator program to partner with higher ed and our school divisions to make sure we face teacher shortages. I'm sure you've heard about those, trying to figure out how we can build out a pathway to make sure we have sufficient preschool teachers. On the educator incentive, we know that this was a really sort of an innovative program for the Commonwealth, and we've partnered with the University of Virginia to do a randomized control study to actually understand impact. We received some federal funding first, and once we realized that it worked, we then came back and requested state dollars. And what we found from this randomized control study is that it helped cut turnover in half. So again, in K-12, where we pay teachers much, much higher wages, they have full benefits, our turnover in any given year is about 5%. In sharp contrast, it's 5 times that in childcare. And providing an incentive to educators helped cut that in half. Once we saw those positive results, we brought them back to the state. We increased some of the funding in response to the pandemic, and we've been able to thoughtfully grow that program, planning to support at least 6,000 educators across the Commonwealth this year. Again, we don't fund any of our teachers in schools. This is all our child care and family day home educators who are working in child care, family day home, faith-based programs that take public dollars and work directly with children. And we're getting quite a bit of national press on this, whether it's the Treasury report or because I think trying to figure out, as everybody is struggling to hire and retain staff, how to do that and to, as we have, demonstrate impact on taxpayer dollars.
At what age do you envision ideal for starting kids, nursery school, whatever you want to call it? What age?
It really varies based on parent choice and parent preference.
Forget that for a second. What's best for the kid?
Again, there's very different contexts. Each kid is unique. I think that more parents need options. Some of them want them as early as 6 weeks or 6 months. Other families are much more interested in preschool. I think
Well, you
certainly.
can't have a kid in nursery school at 6 weeks.
Well, you can have a child in childcare.
Oh, no, I'm talking about where they actually begin to learn.
But they actually begin to learn as early as 6 weeks. There's incredibly rapid brain development, and infants learn a lot of language, a lot of your underlying vocabulary before you even make a sound. You are taking in words, you are taking in how the adults respond. And there are certain parents who we have now, for children under the age of 6, 70% of them have all available parents in the workforce.
Well, what? Okay, never mind.
So I think if another way to answer that question is, and certainly the investments you've made in Virginia Preschool Initiative, if you look at where there's the most demand for childcare subsidy and mixed delivery, to address, I think, some of the concerns that we've heard from kindergarten teachers or what is now a more generally held expectation, I do think kids tremendously benefit from a 2-year experience, a 2-year preschool experience prior to kindergarten that puts them on track for success. And there's a lot of evidence of that. I don't think anybody anywhere would recommend making any of this compulsory, right? There are still families who want to keep their children up through kindergarten. But when you look at where there's the greatest parental demand and where we see the most impact in terms of this providing kids a 2-year experience that addresses their literacy, math, holistically addresses kind of getting them in a classroom, working with peers, figuring out how to follow directions, share, all these sorts of things. Providing that 2-year experience is very important, or at least giving parents that choice.
Well,
And
the
if you-
reason I say that is that I have 2 grandkids. Both started nursery school at age 2. And one's 7, the granddaughter is 7, the grandson is 5. One that's 7 is in the 2nd grade and reads at about a 7th or 8th grade level. The one that's in the kindergarten is reading. And, and the
There's a
results
lot to be
speak for
said for 2-year program.
results speak for itself. I mean, these parents that are holding these kids till they're, ready for kindergarten, generally they're not doing the kids any favor. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases. I mean, my daughter was reading before she was 3.
Mm-hmm.
The newspaper.
A lot of societal issues there, my friend.
Well, no, I understand that, no question about it. But
Absolutely.
her mom was an educator.
A part of what we're trying to do and why we are asking you for incremental increases to the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program is to try to use data from Virginia to look more closely at that issue. There's a tremendous amount of growth in the 3-year-old year. It is important that you have high expectations, that you think about, again, a 2-year experience that supports the intentional learning and development of kids, but there are enormous gaps at kindergarten entry, and I think really sort of thoughtfully, again, in a way that aligns with parent preference and choice, figuring out how you offer those options. But again, the cost of 4-year-old care, the cost of 3-year-old care is $12,000, $13,000, $14,000. 2 years of that, that's $30,000, $26,000. So that's out of reach for many of our
No, I understand that.
families, particularly when you look at some of the tighter income. And so incrementally, sort of, again, still focus on financial need, but some of the investments on the Virginia Preschool Initiative have provided a little bit more flexibility. We hear from school divisions who say, I've got these families that are just above the income cutoff, right, and they can't afford $12,000, and so if we say, if you can demonstrate that child is at risk of not coming to kindergarten ready, you now have that flexibility to make that decision. While we also know you've put in place a measurement and improvement system, an accountability system, so we can look at every single one of our 1,400 VPI classrooms and be able to give you the data on, is this a place where kids are learning or not? So I think that's very, very important. And that leads to, again, the incremental increases here in terms of serving 3-year-olds with our Virginia Preschool Initiative, addressing some of the wait lists. We have small wait lists across the state. allowing places where they don't have classrooms in schools to be able to partner with private providers and offer VPI in a childcare setting, addressing some of the ratios, and then again, providing us the flexibility to meet the needs of communities. One of the things that happens, we saw in Southwest and other places as an example, is you've got pretty tight ratios, or the amount of children you can have in a classroom. And if you end up with one child on the wait list, right, because she or he can't go 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour to the other elementary school, right, that's maybe the only option. And so figuring out, again, how we provide this flexibility to make sure that we can get as many kids in and prepare for kindergarten.
I'm just looking at your numbers right there, and it goes back to the drum I was beating. I mean, there is a significant increase in reoccurring expenses just on this page.
Mm-hmm. And these are all, none of this is at all related to the pandemic, right? These are, 137 is just years and years of,
Critical, I'm just saying from a
no, that's true.
qualification standpoint, there's a significant amount of this page, a
Absolutely.
significant
I know.
amount, and that's
Yeah.
how many hundreds of millions of dollars we're going
Right.
to embed in the budget on a recurring basis.
Yes.
Could drive some other decisions that are totally unrelated
Absolutely.
to education.
The one thing I would note, and just to sort of to prioritize dollars in terms of your return on investment, these are probably going to take you further, because if these kids come in more ready, they're more likely to be reading on third grade, graduate, have better life outcomes as well. Item 137, some language changes as well here. Again, being thoughtful about how we can, if we've got spaces available and more kids can benefit from our Virginia Preschool Initiative while remaining true to our mission of serving those kids who are less likely to have the opportunity to come to school ready. Calling for us to benchmark these rates, right? I think to Senator Norman's point before, asking for more dollars, making sure that we are addressing the cost, not a penny more, not a penny less, based on what's actually being spent out there, and doing the same for our community providers. Again, making sure there's a level playing field between our public and our publicly funded private options. I wanted to come back. This is a part of what you've asked for, sir, in terms of where we are in the child care relief funding, and just kind of gives you a sense of what's gone out. Much of this are for sort of one-time expenses, and we're trying to be very thoughtful about putting the state on the hook for anything, to use that terminology. But significant amount of money, when all is said is done, between the CARES Act, CRSA, and the American Rescue Plan, we will provide more than $600 million in direct cash assistance, to more than 4,000 private child care providers across the state. So that's a really important relief effort. DSS started that and did 4 rounds. We moved it to DOE. We're in the process. We're on round 2 of 3. We've been very clear. These are one-time dollars, but are helping to, I think that's part of the reason we're back to 93% of our programs operational, and the discretionary funds there, the one that is that remains. Again, some of those changes on structuring the program, trying to be extremely thoughtful about how they can be used first over the course of the next 2 years to support the program, and then thinking about how do you then switch back to our child care and development block grant to avoid any cost in state general funds. Again, using the federal funds in a strategic manner to bring the sector back and support the sector, and then ultimately transition back to the ongoing federal source, which is the child care and development block grant.
Okay. Any other questions?